Martin Luther King Jr. He has deeply changed our country into what it is today. Because of him, blacks and whites are now equal.
King left behind a legacy of important victories for blacks in America.
I think he had the biggest impact on our country's history.
Without him, our country would be very different. Who knows when black and whites would eventually become equal.
It all started on July 15th, 1929. The year Martin Luther King was born, which was on the verge of the Great Depression. As a child, Martin had a very loving family.
He and his father were very close and they never argued.
He grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, where the discrimination laws and the segregation laws were very strict.
In Atlanta, being black meant being treated very differently.
Like how blacks weren't equal to whites. How they couldn't do things whites could.
Sometimes, blacks were completely separated from the community.
Blacks weren't equal to whites. He wasn't greater or even equal. Meaning, they had to sit in the back of buses even if there was room. They had to use separate restaurants, bathrooms, theaters, schools, and even segregated water fountains. They were always treated as a second or even third-class citizen. Whites treated blacks like dirt, both physically and mentally. Name-calling, no respect, being striked, and very offensive insults. At age 5, Martin joined a church. It was like home to him. Martin had several events in his young life that really affected how he felt about the segregation and discrimination laws against blacks. For example, at the age of 6, Martin had a best friend. He was white. Every day they would play together. One day, Martin went to his friend's house and his father opened the door. He said he didn't want him around anymore and he wasn't allowed to play with his son because he was colored. This upset him deeply, and from that day as a child, he learned to hate every white person.
He hated the system and he didn't think it was fair. As a child, Martin went through many unfair experiences. Martin Luther King Jr. graduated from Crozer in 1951 at the top of his class. He was awarded a scholarship and he decided to use it to earn a Doctor of Philosophy degree at Boston University.
Even after college, he still studied the nature of God. He also studied Gandhi, who freed India from British rule with nonviolence, which inspired Martin Luther King. Not much later, King married Coretta Scott, a young music student from Alabama, on June 18, 1953.
King went to many places including Ghana, Africa to study Gandhi and his followers. On May 17, 1957, approximately 37,000 people, black and white, gathered in front of the Lincoln Memorial to demonstrate their support of the Supreme Court decision.
He called upon all the branches of government to encourage and persuade desegregation. Afterwards, Vice President Nixon invited Martin Luther King Jr. to the meeting that was held 6 days later. But Martin Luther King left empty-handed.
In the fall of 1957, Congress passed the first civil rights bill since 1875.
The bill created a Civil Rights Commission which had the authority to investigate voting irregularities.
But it was a weak bill that would have little effect on black voter registration.
In the fall of 1958, he traveled north to promote the book Stride Toward Freedom, describing the Montgomery bus boycott. He appeared on TV and gave radio interviews.
But many times his car was pelted with eggs and haters arose.
Later one afternoon, King was in a department store signing autographs for copies of his book.
But one woman came up and started cursing at Martin and stabbed him in the chest. He was rushed to the hospital. He fully recovered, although the woman was arrested.
On August 28, 1963, King was ready. 200,000 people were gathered in Washington, D.C. near the Washington Monument for their jobs and freedom.
Hundreds of thousands of both black and whites waved banners that were encouraging freedom. There were many speeches by black leaders and people. Some were inspiring, many were angry and demanding, and eventually Martin Luther King was ready to make his speech.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go
King's speech was
down in
inspiring,
history.
and as he finished, people clapped and cheered with tears in their eyes. After much arguing, on August 6, 1965, the president signed the voting rights bill into law.
Within 10 days after the bill was signed, 20,000 black people had registered to vote for the first time. On April 4, 1968, King was assassinated by James Earl Ray, who was caught eventually.
His funeral was attended by the vice president, senators, governors, mayors, entertainers, rabbis, bishops, and the ordinary people that he tried to help. Desegregation provided new opportunities for black people. As a result, the income of a black family rose.
Desegregation in schools provided better educational opportunities for black people. By the 1980s, the number of black college students had more than doubled.
Martin Luther King made a great difference and he will always be remembered. The desegregation still remains today.
Martin Luther King Jr. has taught me to stand up for what you believe in and never give up.
Martin Luther King Jr. never gave up on what he believed in, even though it was against the law, but he knew it was right.
He will always be remembered.
And I hope he rests in peace.